Okay, well, let's start. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's session on Japan's energy priorities and policies in the Middle East and North Africa region. I'm Dick Morningstar, and for those who don't know me, I'm the founding director and chairman of the Global Energy Center here at the Atlantic Council. And we're very pleased to be partnering with Ambassador Fred Hoff and the rest of our colleagues at the Rafik Hariri Center for the Middle East to put on today's event. We at the Atlantic Council firmly believe in the value of leveraging both our regional and functional expertise to explore pressing issues like those today. So it is critically important that the Global Energy Center, for example, work with all the regional centers, such as the Hariri Center. And when it comes to the world of energy, there are so many linkages, geopolitical, diplomatic, commercial, and more, that we all benefit from taking a multifaceted approach to assessing these issues. I would also like to note that we're putting on today's event in collaboration with our colleagues at the Embassy of Japan, with whom the Atlantic Council is very much engaged and hopefully will become even increasingly engaged. And we look forward to robust collaboration between all of the centers here, certainly including the Global Energy Center and the Embassy. It's also a real privilege to host experts from Japan who were generous enough to join us here in Washington. Fred will be moderating the panel, will introduce all of the members of the panel, but I do want to say it's a special pleasure that we have Sarah Vakshuri, who's a non-resident fellow at the Global Energy Center and a true expert on Iran, and my now old friend, Ken Koyama, who is here from the IEEJ in Tokyo and is really, with full respect to all of our Japanese colleagues, I would say Ken is really the guru of Japan energy. So it's great to have you here as well as the other members of the panel. So with that note, I'm going to turn things over to Masataka Okano, who's the political minister at the embassy, who will provide some opening remarks to frame today's conversation. He'll then turn it over to Fred, who will moderate the discussion. So thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Masataka Okano, Minister of the Japanese Embassy. I've been in the foreign service almost 30 years, and I still believe I have to convince more that diplomacy is a very delicate and sophisticated art. I discover new things every day, even after 30 years of service in the foreign diplomacy. In daily life, if you see something great or nice, a nice painting, you should say, or you're supposed to say, you just say how beautiful it is, right? If you say something ugly, you say, oh, how bad it is. But diplomacy, it is not always the case. If you say something beautiful painting, you tend to say that, oh, there's something wrong inside. And there's some conspiracy story things behind this. Life should not be so easy. So there should be something. If you see something ugly, well, this seems ugly, but there's something good inside. If you keep watching this, seeing this for the next, for example, 10 days, you come to realize the beauty of this painting. I mean that through force of habit, we tend to think that. And sometimes we do what we score own goals. So diplomacy is a very difficult challenge. And that happens sometimes to me. And energy sector is one of these difficult, challenging issues for me. I have 3 questions to myself in terms of energy today, and I'm very looking forward to listening to what experts have to say. First is that should regional tensions in the Middle East escalate, and the flow of energy be in danger, the impact on Japan's economy would be enormous. That's what has been already said many times. Then Japan's primary challenges now is to diversify our range of energy sources by expanding our renewable energy production capabilities. We all know that this is not an easy task. The other challenge is to diversify exporters of fossil energy to Japan, focusing on sources outside the Middle East. What should we do? What can we do concretely? This is the first point. And second point is that this is a new phenomenon. We are seeing the recent downfall of oil prices. Oil and gas have become cheaper. This is very good for me and for my wife in daily life. But is it really good for the Japanese economy? Is it really good for the stability of the region? Second, and the third point is that the demand for oil and gas will not increase significantly in Japan, as it will in China, for example. So some discuss passionately that we may import more oil and gas from Siberia or Sakhalin, but will there be enough of an appetite for more oil and gas in Japan? So with all these elements in mind, personally, I believe that it is important to discuss Japan's energy priorities and policies and their implications to the United States of America. So I'm greatly looking forward to the panel discussions among eminent scholars in this field. Thank you.
Okano-san, thank you so much for your remarks. Good morning to one and all. My name is Fred Hoff. I'm a senior research fellow, senior resident fellow here at the Rafiq Hariri Center of the Atlantic Council. My role this morning is a modest one. It is to welcome you all to the Atlantic Council and to moderate a discussion that will feature four truly impressive experts. To my immediate left, we have Dr. Ken Koyama. He is Chief Economist and Managing Director at the Institute of Energy Economics, Japan. He is also a professor at the University of Tokyo. He'll be looking at the global energy market and tying it into key Middle Eastern issues. To his left, Dr. Sarah Vakshuri is a non-resident senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. She's the founder and president of SVB Energy International, a strategic energy consulting firm based here in DC. Her focus will be on energy issues in the Middle East, with special focus, I think, on Iran and Saudi Arabia. Dr. Yasuyuki Matsunaga is a professor of political science at the Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. He'll focus on the implications for Japan of Iran entering into an era of sanctions relief. And he'll also say something, I think, about the ongoing Saudi-Iranian rift. And finally, Dr. Kota Suechika is a professor at the College of International Relations, Ritsumeikan University, Kyoto. Having lived and studied in Syria, he'll share with us his views of the potential role Japan might play to help resolve that crisis. And I must say that for somebody my age, it's particularly reassuring to be in the company of four doctors. Thank you. Speaking personally, I've been looking forward to this program for a long time. As I mentioned to our guests earlier this morning, I've had literally decades worth of interactions with Japanese diplomats, mainly in the Middle East. And what I've noticed over the past few decades is the tremendous investment the Japanese Foreign Ministry has made in developing a cadre of real experts, people who know the politics, the society, and perhaps more than anything else, the languages. I have met some truly amazing Japanese diplomats who have mastered Farsi, Hebrew, and the many dialects of Arabic. It's been an amazing investment, and as I mentioned this morning, the one person I know who speaks Hebrew better than probably 90% of Israelis is an active duty Japanese diplomat who was a real legend in Israel when he served there. He was a fellow who could tell endless stories and jokes in Hebrew, and if people weren't exactly understanding the point, he could switch into Yiddish. So one of our objectives this morning, maybe our principal objective, is really to find more about the exact policy context in which this very, very, very impressive expertise operates. I'll ask each of our guests to speak for 5 to 7 minutes or so, focusing on their particular area of concentration, and then we'll move directly into a Q&A session. So, Ken, why don't we start with you? Welcome.
Thank you, Fred, for your kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ken Koyama from IEJ, and I'd like to thank Atlantic Council for kindly inviting me to this very timely and very important event. And particularly, my special thanks goes to the Ambassador Morningstar, who is always very kind to us and IEJ. This morning, I'd like to speak 3 issues on the theme of this seminar. Firstly, I'd like to briefly touch upon Japan's energy policy priority. And secondly, I'd like to talk about Japan and the Middle East energy relation. And thirdly, the issue of the low oil price impact on Japan and the world energy market stability is the third topic of my speech. Let me start by very, very briefly touch upon the Japan's energy policy priority. Tomorrow we'll have March 11th. The day 5 years ago, we have an extremely difficult, very, very disastrous event, the big earthquake, tsunami, followed by the nuclear accident in Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And 5 years have passed, and the Japanese government and industry and citizens made a serious effort to overcome this tragic event. And so I think that gradually the things are moving towards a better direction. But I have to say there are so many unsolved challenges and difficulty remains. And the government continued to work out very hard to reestablish our long-term energy policy. And finally, last year, the government concluded that the desirable energy policy mix up to 2030. Defining that desirable energy mix was very, very challenging in the past years because of the political and social sensitivity, including the issue of nuclear power. But the last year, the government made a kind of a decision that we need that energy mix target to achieve so-called 3E energy policy goal simultaneously. 3E stands for energy security, which is a traditionally very, very important topic for Japan, and environmental protection as well as economic efficiency. So 3E simultaneous achievement with safety as a precondition is a very important topic. And to do that, the government target includes that 20 to 20% nuclear power contribution in total power generation in the year 2030, followed by 20 to 24% contribution by renewable power, including solar PV, wind power, geothermal, mini hydro, and 26% coal, 27% LNGs. This is a desired goal to achieve 3E policy goals simultaneously. So I think that establishing this goal is a kind of very important milestone for Japanese energy policy priority. But I have to draw your attention that setting a desirable target is different from implementing this desirable target. Frankly speaking, achieving this target is very, very difficult, given the political sensitivity remained at the nuclear issues, given that the very ambitious target to achieve the further enhancement of energy efficiency, which Japan is already a top runner in the world, and considering the difficulty of economic feasibility of renewable power introduction in a large scale to Japanese grid is also a very important issue. So from now on, we have to really pay very strong attention and make a strong effort to realize the desirable target. And the second topic, and in this priority, I think that still that the relation with the Middle East remained very, very important. Japan is very traditionally energy import dependent countries. But because of the Fukushima, now Japan's energy self-sufficiency rate declined to the level of 6%. 6% self-sufficiency is a kind of lowest number in OECD country. So we depend on Middle East oil and LNG very heavily. About 80% of crude oil supplies comes from the Middle East, and about 30% of LNG, liquefied natural gas, is coming from the Middle East, mainly from Qatar. So the stability of the Middle East region is really a matter of great concern every time, but now and probably in the future. Of course, we know that now there are many, many difficulties or uncertainties over the stability in the region, the rise of the Islamic states, and the difficult situation in Syria and Yemen, and recently the rivalry between the Saudi-Iran. I think that all these issues relate to the Middle East stability. So I think that Japan continues to pay attention to what's going to happen in the Middle East. And interestingly, that the very difficult Middle East situation coexists with a low price environment. And low price environment was as a result from the many combination of many factors, including the growth of oil and gas supply in the United States. Very good news for Japan. Thanks to the shale revolution, the global energy landscape changed a lot. And slowdown in Chinese economy also matters. So all in all, that the global oil market, global gas market we are facing that situation of kind of oversupply. And lower price environment is good for Japan as a heavily import-dependent nation. Some people recently started to have some concern that the recent, particularly low price experience in last month was something to do with the stability in global economy, including the potential downside risk in Chinese economy. So, of course, there are some negative side of the picture of the low price environment. Also, negative side includes the impact on the producing country like the Middle East or former Soviet Union countries. So, and also we have to pay attention that the low price may have the kind of element to slow down energy efficiency effort, improvement effort, and to promote non-fossil fuel energy like renewable or nuclear power. So we have to pay close attention what will be the potential negative consequence on the low oil price environment. But at this moment, Japan, as an importing nation, is in a good position. And I think that the Japanese government and Japanese energy importing country need to best utilize the current market environment. And sadly, that the low price environment, I already covered this topic. But I think that fundamentally this is a big issue, big challenge for energy exporters, mainly in the Middle East or Latin America or Russia. And I think that there is a very strong vulnerability in the economic structure. The last year that our institute made a special study on the impact of lower price environment up to 2030, 2040, and result straightforwardly shows that if we have a lower price scenario, the economic negative consequence to the producing country in the Middle East is really enormous. The implication is that there is a danger of monoculture economy. So Middle East countries need to seriously start to think about the economic diversification or economic upgrading, including the promotion of energy efficiency and promotion of diversification of their energy and economic structure, to which I think that Japan, United States can help to work together. That's my end of the story. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ken. That really gives us a lot to think about. Sarah, delighted you're with us today.
Thank you
Over
for
to
having
you.
me. Thanks for having me and for your kind introduction. I would like to first focus separately on the energy issues in Saudi Arabia and Iran, and then briefly we'll speak about the rivalry between the two and the consequences on the global energy market and also the stability of the Middle East. On the Saudi side, what we observe is that the low oil prices had pretty interesting consequences on the economy of the country. So Saudi leaders are focusing on privatizing many industries, including electricity industries, which creates a lot of opportunity for international investors and also creates lots of jobs which have been faded in the past few years due to the low oil prices and creates higher opportunities. Saudi on the electricity and power generation side, they are trying to move and shift from using traditional fossil fuels as a feedstock of their power generation into more solar and alternative energy. And it's quite interesting that currently about 99.5% of the country has access to electricity, and the leaders are planning to increase this to 100% in the next few months by the end of this year. And it's by the next decade, the amount of electricity demand, particularly in Saudi, is going to increase in a way that the amount of investment inside Saudi Arabia that is required to meet the demand for electricity is about $90 billion. And they're, of course, introducing different technologies and different policies to for the energy conservation and increasing the efficiency, reducing the consumption, inefficient consumption of energy. But the total amount of saving that is expected would be about $1.5 million to maximum $3 billion dollars. So it's still a huge market for investment. The other issue is that they start through thinking to, they start considering IPOs for the Saudi Aramco, hugest oil and gas petroleum company in the world, which create a lot of excitement among the international communities, investors, and even a very low amount of shares, and very, even if not in the upstream, in downstream petrochemical particularly, or refinery sector, that creates a lot of opportunities for international investors. The overall policy of Saudi Arabia is to create long-term partnership with different countries, with different companies, to create not only a more political, a more diverse political alliance through business, but also to create a more diverse economy, an economy that in the next decade or two is not that much dependent on crude oil exports. So this is a very important shift in Saudi policy. You see many interesting factors. I think the Iran U.S. nuclear deal created this awareness among the Saudi and other GCC members that Saudi and GCC cannot rely on U.S. as a long-term source of creating security for them. So they entered into a more active and more active policy for securing their relation, either by increasing their interest with the United States or other countries. You might all read the news that Saudi has purchased many agricultural lands in U.S. So it would be interesting that Saudi is going to import food from U.S. or if at some point U.S. would need Saudi for supplying its domestic food from these lands. It's important that Saudi still has the ownership of the hugest refinery in the United States in Port Arthur, the Motiva refinery. So even if at some point all of the refineries in a hypothetical, even all the refineries in U.S. decide to convert to processing the light domestic crude oil, still that 1 million or more than a million barrels per barrel of Saudi share is going to remain in United States. And Saudi can continue to decide that it wants to export crude oil to U.S. And they are expanding such economic relation with other countries. So it's very important that, especially at the event of low oil prices, one of the policies that Saudi is introducing is that they are going to match the oil for investment, for long-term investment. So the traditional oil sale contracts, 1 year, let's say 1 year oil contract sale to Japan. This is going to convert into a 10-year or 5 years contract that includes a more broader topics and engagement, financial and investment engagement more than oil. So you can, by creating, this is part of their policy to create incentives for their oil clients and customers to purchase their oil for longer term. Of course, this would be a market policy, and this gives a higher hand to Saudi Arabia when it comes to their other rivals like Iran or other similar crude type exporter. So this is very important that Saudi in the next, in the new generation of leadership and also in the next decades looking into creating long-term economic partnership with United States and other countries in the world. When it comes to the low oil prices, I'm really not a fan or big supporter of Saudi is keeping the prices down to hurt Iran or Russia. Of course, that could be one political consequence of low oil prices, that Saudi would, of course, benefit and being interested in hurting Iran's economy or Russia's economy. But I think Saudi has broader and more important policies and gains from these low oil prices. The first and most important one is that the low oil prices reduces the speed of the growth of the production of expensive oils, unconventional oils or other sources of oil that is not as cheap to produce as it is in Persian Gulf. So this not only benefits Saudi Arabia, it benefits Iran, it benefits other GCC producer of crude oil. So it reduces the speed. I don't want to say that it reduces the amount, but the speed of growth. The second thing is that it increases the demand for fossil fuels. Now most of us are more comfortable in filling our tanks paying only $20, $30. Before we were paying $50, $60. So especially the driving demand in the United States, the drivers in the United States were part of important demand for crude oil in the world, especially in the summer. That people start traveling across the country in United States. And many people were start using the cars that were using alternative sources of energy. So low oil prices is creating and strengthening the demand for fossil fuels, which is again benefiting Saudi Arabia, but not only Saudi Arabia, countries like Iran and other traditional producer of crude oil. The third and other important issue is that it helps the Saudi leadership to reinforce their long-term policies, energy policies, that they could not do that. It had, of course, higher economic consequences for them, but also political. And that's to reduce the fuel subsidies. Reducing the fuel subsidies was it's a very important policy that all of the GCC producers, including Iran and Persian Gulf producers, were following. Iran was the only country among all of these countries that many years ago could start reducing the fuel subsidies step by step, phase by phase. But Iran's type of government is very different from Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, people see the king as their father that gives them monthly pocket money, so they're supporting him. So it's very hard for the leader to put its position in a shoes of, let's say, like Iranian government and start reducing the fuel subsidies. But now that the prices are really low, the Saudis government, the Kuwaitis, other GCC countries, that they have a similar type of governments, it's easier for them to start do these price subsidy programs. I will switch to Iran. On the Iran side, Iran was under sanctions since the Islamic Revolution, 1979. Particularly US sanctions. And since 2012, there was a general agreement among Western countries, particularly, and their allies like Japan or other countries, particularly in Asia, Iran's traditional importers of crude oil, to limit Iran's crude oil import, to target Iran's crude oil revenue, and to put a broader economic and energy sanctions on Iran. Which it concluded to nuclear deal, and now Iran is suddenly like an untapped market that is open for all sorts of investment, from mining sector to petrochemical energy. So I think nowadays Iranian officials are overwhelmed with these foreign delegates traveling to Iran suddenly after years of not seeing anyone except for Chinese or Russians. Something interesting that we notice is that there is an agreement among European, at least, countries, maybe US, I don't know, I cannot really judge because there was no public statement on that, that the current government in Iran, which has the centrist ideas, not completely reformist, liberal, is not the really right wing, the current government is kind of a rational people that they could talk and negotiate for longer sustainable term. And what they think is that by encouraging the economic prosperity in Iran and investment, they're going to reinforce the position of the current government in Iran by, of course, people feeling that things are getting better and going to vote or trying to keep the government in the place. And this is something that we were just saying from public statement of the different governments. It was in the news just very recently that UK is going to send and have sent financial delegates and trade delegates to Iran. And after many years, you all know that BP was one day Anglo-Persian oil company. But really since the Islamic Revolution in Iran, UK companies were not really in practically active in Iran's energy industry. So they are trying to not only benefit from all of these economic opportunities, energy opportunities in Iran, low complex rocks, low cost of crude oil, all of these incentives that Iran is trying, hopefully if they reach to a final political agreement introducing their new petroleum contract, IPC, not only they're trying to benefit from the economic side, but also trying to support and strengthen the position of the current government in Iran. Like Saudi Arabia, Iran also is trying to create lots of incentives. They're kind of matching each other's incentives. They're matching the prices that they're offering to each market. They're matching each other's discounts. Iran, like Saudi Arabia, is offering long-term oil sale contracts for goods, for import of goods or services or investment. They are trying to, again, like Saudi Arabia, integrate their upstream, downstream industries. So, for instance, an Indian company could come and invest in a gas field, produce the gas, but because of US sanctions, Iran cannot easily use LNG facilities, and pipeline is always political and hard to use, especially if the country is far, and in case of India, you have Pakistan on your way. So India, instead of taking Iran gas, can invest in downstream petrochemical and put the gas that it produced in one field, use it in petrochemical factory, and then take the, let's say, urea or fertilizer, whatever it needs for its country. So they're trying to create lots of this type of opportunity. Mining sector is a sector that is in both countries. Iran has, of course, much more diverse mining resources, Saudi Arabia too. So there are a lot of opportunities, and they're trying to create more incentives for investors. On the rivalry between the two countries, what is fascinating is that, of course, the two countries has economic rivalry on the oil market since 2012, that Iran lost more than 1 million barrels of market share. Saudi took over most of it, and it doesn't seem that Saudi is going to give up any part of that market share to Iran. In fact, they increased their production in the first month of the year, January, that Iran was about to come back to the market and increase its export. So there is no indications or sign that Saudi Arabia is going to give up or reduce what they might freeze, but not reducing what they're producing and give any market share to Iran. But there is, it seems, a lot of focus on Saudi Arabia-Iran oil rivalry, both from international community, but also in Iran and among Iranian officials. They put a lot of focus on Saudi Arabia. But if you look at it, who really took Iran's traditional market share in China? It was not Saudi Arabia, it's Russia. So Russia took a massive part of Iran's market share in China. Russia took Iran's market share in China. And it's interesting that in the month of January, the import of oil from Iran, the Chinese import of oil from Iran was less than the January of 2015 that Iran was sanctions, and there was limitations on countries to import oil from Iran. So Saudi Arabia is not really is not the only Iran's rival in the energy market, but Russia, obviously, both in the gas and the oil market. We see there is a lot of interest among European Union. They're sending a lot of delegates to Iran talking about gas imports from Iran. Even in the short term, at the current time, that Iran doesn't have any capacity to export further gas. Their export capacity is going to build at least by the end of this decade. EU is going to use Iran, issue an import of gas from Iran as a bargaining chip with Russia to push the prices of gas, Russian gas lower in the market. So Saudi Arabia is not the only economic and energy challenge for Iran. But perhaps there's much more interest between Iran and Russia to really focus, or at least directly talk about Russia, talks of Russia. When it comes to political side, there has been lots of course, political rivalry, especially in Middle East. I know that my colleague is going to talk more about it, but something that is interesting, at this current moment, there's no indication that there's going to be a military confrontation between Iran and Saudi Arabia inside their own lands. Because if there is any attack or any military confrontation between the two countries, both countries are going to lose on their exports, on their economy. So any confrontation between Saudi Arabia, if it goes to the military confrontations, on the first level is going to be outside of their borders. And the consequences of that for the oil market, of course, is to prevent the sudden shock of the prices, sudden increase of the prices. And in fact, it's interesting that Saudi-Iran rivalry had a different and surprisingly an ironic effect on the market. The moment that the Shia clerk, I'm sure you're going to talk about it, was executed in Saudi Arabia, we had clients calling us and asking, what do you think? Tomorrow, how much the prices are going to be higher? And we told them the prices are going to be lower because the whole world will give up on Saudi-Iran's agreement in the OPEC or any OPEC agreement to reducing the production. The countries are going to be so stiff, so snub about their production, and any prospects of the agreement, any agreement in OPEC is going to collapse. So at this point, we really don't see any impact on prices to push the prices higher, might go lower. So that's the thing. And there is an issue. I know that I went perhaps over my 5 minutes on the export of crude oil. Is Iran's rebound of oil production going to reduce the prices further. We never think that it's going to be further than this, because the two countries, Saudi and Iran, had already offered the maximum discount they could to the customers before the January starts. So any other incentive or any other discount would be in a sort of other incentives. It's not going to be further discounts per barrel. And Saudi and Russia already, and other GCC members, pumped and increased their maximum level of their capacity as much as they could in the month of January, at least there's kind of an agreement. Ken-san could, of course, comment on that. So we don't think that the price range is going to be much lower if Iran is going to come back to the market, especially that we don't think that Iran's 1 million barrels per day of lost market share is going to be regained quickly. It's going to be rather gradual, and Iran is going to be very wise, making sure that first find a market and secure market and customers for its crude oil, and then gradually increases its oil production. Thank you.
Well, Sarah, I think you actually managed to cram about 90 minutes worth of information into 10, so that's not bad at all. Dr. Matsunaga, I suspect that Dr. Vakshuri's comments segue pretty nicely into your own, so please, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hoff, and it's my pleasure to be here and contribute to this very interesting discussion. I'm a political scientist, so I approached this issue from a slightly different perspective, and I specifically discussed the implications for Japan of the recent developments in the Persian Gulf area. And my role, I think, is to share how policymakers and then private sector actors based in Tokyo would see and approach this very difficult part of the world. So I specifically would like to discuss on two different developments. The first one is the developments surrounding Iran on the international or global level. As my colleague Sarah mentioned, we have witnessed an upsurge in the visit of high-level delegation to Iran, and the ensuing serious competition among European and Asian countries seeking to expand relations with Iran, particularly in economic areas, but also political and diplomatic level as well. And the implications for Japan here are straightforward, as I said. The primary actors in this competition are private business or corporate entities. But then, in order to go to the difficult, high-risk areas like Middle East, especially like a country like Iran, those private actors need to be supported by the governments. And in this context, so cross-coordination between the government and the private sector will help the companies involved to gain some head start in this competition. The Japanese government has been sending high-level delegations since last summer, particularly September, October. And then it's been reported that the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will visit Iran by the end of this year, which is kind of remarkable because that will be the first Prime Minister's visit to Iran since 1978. 1978, then our Prime Minister Fukuda and then US President Carter both visited Iran, and they were completely unaware of what's going to happen the next year. And then so this Prime Minister's visit is only symbolic in a way because the Prime Minister Abe and the President Rouhani has met in the US on the side of the UN General Assembly multiple times. So it's not the first face-to-face interaction, but symbolically that it shows the Japanese government commitment to support the private sector actors to go and then do business in Iran. More concretely, for example, the Japanese government has signed an agreement with the Iranian counterpart with the visit by the Iranian economic and finance minister to Tokyo. And in the scheme, promising the Japanese company to investment guarantees for longer term large high-risk projects. Also, in this connection, I would add that various Japanese corporations and companies have comparative advantage, internationally speaking, given that most of those Japanese companies have been involved in the various projects inside Iran, at least since the 1970s. And then we have the accumulation of expertise and the institutional memory and the expertise in terms of the actual personalities and so on. And then we have had the relatively friendly and stable and broad relations with Iranian civil society economic actors before the revolution and after the revolution. So that's how they would try to go ahead with this advantage. And then the primary potential risk here from the Japanese point of view is that the possibility of worsening of relations between Iran and the United States upon the arrival of a new US administration early next year. So we consider that the nuclear agreement between the Iran and the 6+1 a major success, historical success, and we wholeheartedly embrace, and we are one of the primary benefiters of this agreement. But we are anxious, to be honest. As our experience for the last 3.5 decades shows, it has always been the Iran-US relations, not Iran-Japan relations, that will condition how secure Japanese economic environment with Iran inside that country can be. So we'll be very anxiously awaiting how the US-Iran relations will evolve in the coming year or so. Moving on to the next topic, the Iran-Saudi law and other regional developments. We have, for the last 6 months or so, witnessed the worsening of the Saudi-Iran bilateral relations, influenced by the various events such as the MENA pilgrimage stampede incident that was last September, and about 465 Iranian pilgrims died, and that was the worst among the other countries in this incident. And as my colleague mentioned, the execution of the Shia Sheikh al-Nimr in early January on the Saudi side. And on the Iranian side, the following day, the mob attacked the Saudi embassy in Tehran, fortunately at the nighttime when nobody was there. But then it was a criminal act, and the Iranian government has condemned it. They arrested the perpetrators. 2 days ago, they issued an indictment of the 22 main perpetrators. So they are working on it. But then, nonetheless, internationally, especially from the Saudi side, they probably consider that the intentional act of the sabotage or criminal activities or sign of hostility. So, as we all know, this incident culminated in the severance of diplomatic ties with Iran by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And then we have seen many subsequent downgrading of the relations between the Iran and the GCC countries. And the spillover is going to the GCC and Lebanon, for example. So regionally, the Saudi-Iranian law seems to, its impact seems to be expanding. We can obviously add this to a more longer historical background of Saudi-Iranian rivalries. It's not just the last 6 months, as we all know. This obviously dates back to 1979 when the successful Iranian revolution inspired Shias in the neighboring countries of Iran, especially Iraq and Pakistan. And then Saudi Arabia also had some difficulties with the separate incident in Mecca in 1979. But as a result of these developments, Saudis entered in the library in the form of exporting their version of Islam, Sunni Wahhabi version of Islam, and Iran is exporting their version of Shia Islam to the Shiites in the greater Middle Eastern region. And however, in the 1990s, after the end of the Iran-Iraq war, Iran's the stance changed more toward more moderate and more friendly relations with the neighboring countries under the presidency of Hashemi al-Sanjani. And then Saudi Arabia reciprocated to some extent. But then, unfortunately, this library came back recently in 2003 with the fall of the Iraqi Ba'athist state and then coming of the Shia-dominated government in Baghdad. And we witnessed today the same library with sectarian geopolitical nature in the Syrian and Yemeni civil war. The Iran 6+1 nuclear deal has seemingly further exacerbated this rivalry, as my colleague mentioned. And then the reason I'm mentioning all this is that, how do we approach this kind of difficult developments from the Japanese point of view? I would like to mention two things. Just focus on the implication for us. The implication of the Saudi-Iran law for us boils down to one question, whether that the library impacts on our separate bilateral relations with Iran on the one side and Saudi Arabia on the other side. And the answer, as of today, seems to be we have not, our separate bilateral relations have not been impacted, affected negatively at all. Of course, that would logically hinge on whether or not this rivalry will further escalate into the open warfare between the two countries. Then that would be the completely different story. But I join the majority view that that would be highly unlikely, at the moment. But then that doesn't mean that they are not engaging in the proxy wars in many different areas. However, as far as the direct impact on Japan's energy priority and policy, that proxy wars were having almost no impact. But then I'm mentioning this not because of the very narrowly centered Japanese national interest, economic interest point of view, but then rather to highlight how we approach differently from other countries in the world to this the Middle Eastern or Persian Gulf problems. Our approach is to strengthen the bilateral relations, broaden the bilateral relations, not just to buy oil or natural gas, and not just to buy on a longer-term basis, but then widen the relations. With regard to Iran, we invest in the various projects. We send economic development specialists. We try to have more diplomatic, political, cultural, social relations. We send tourists and all kinds of things. Saudi Arabia is a bit different because the nature of the economy and the nature of the society, we are not that involved. For example, they wouldn't need the agriculture developmental specialists that we are sending to Iran. However, but the basic approach is to, by strengthening and stabilizing the bilateral relations, we are trying to indirectly contribute to the stability of the region and the stability of the Middle East in large. And then, so by having the economic relations, is not just a selfish or narrowly interest-based approach, but then our approach is to not enter with the more, the national security, military kind of approach, but through the more economic and social diplomatic relations and trying to contribute to the eventual stability of the region. Thank you.
Dr. Matsunaga, thank you very much, and I think your closing thoughts really help us introduce our final speaker here. I think everybody in the room can gather that based on the remarks of our first three speakers, the issue of energy security is paramount in Japan's approach to the Middle East, North Africa. But it's not necessarily everything. Japan made an enormous contribution, mainly monetary, to the liberation of Kuwait in the early 90s. Japanese self-defense personnel have performed peacekeeping duties on the Golan Heights. Japanese economic initiatives in the region, such as the Peace Corridor in the West Bank, have had major impact. Our next speaker is a person who has really spent some quality time examining some of these other Japanese approaches, which may, as Dr. Matsunaga indicates, contribute to the main objective, but which nevertheless are worth noting in and of themselves. So, Dr. Suichika, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ambassador Hoff, to the introduction. I'm Kota Suichika from Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, Japan. My role here is to provide the discussion with a view from a political angle, particularly by focusing on the Syrian crisis. When we think about Japan's energy security, we also need to see the non-oil producers in the Middle East. In the past, it was Israel and Palestine, which was potential threat to the regional stability. I think it's still a threat to the regional stability. But today, it is Syria. Syria is the most crucial agenda for Japanese energy security, and also Iraq to some extent. While Syria is not a big oil-producing country and therefore is much less important than the hydrocarbon suppliers, for example, the GCC member states, for Japan's future survival. Syria is actually located in a strategically sensitive or fragile part of the region, which has a great significance for the stability of the Middle East as a whole. And therefore, for Japan's energy supplies and future survival as a nation. If I employ a realist mode of thinking, or maybe we can say pragmatic thinking, whichever scenario prevails, either the Assad regime defeats the oppositions, or the regime is replaced by the oppositions, it wouldn't make a big difference to Japan. The matter is not who governs Syria, but Syria is governed or not. So, well, at the end of the day, the conflict is not necessarily to be solved, but to be contained by any means. Am I too cold-blooded? Well, I just try to take it in a pragmatic way, and just in theory, as a political scientist. I never support either dictators or extremists anyway. Anyway, in this sense, the worst scenario which Japan has to prevent is further spillover of the conflict to the whole region. The collapse of Syria definitely would lead to the collapse of the whole region, which then inevitably hinders Japan's energy security. So the question here is, what can Japan do? What policy options does Japan have? Actually, I think there are only a few options. Some of them already Professor Matsunaga pointed out. Why Japan doesn't have a wide range of choice in policy making? It's mainly because Japan's Middle East policy was traditionally passive and reactive. That is based on the non-engagement principle in the Middle East conflicts, actually any conflict in the world, in the form of interventionist style. So we know that Japan's hard power projection is very, very limited due to both the international and domestic constraints. So we may say that Japan did not or does not have a long-term foreign policy strategy towards the non-oil producing countries in the region, but only a patchwork of, let's say, ad hoc or short-term actions. Of course, we shouldn't forget the fact that Japan has been a great financial donor for the social and human development in the region for decades. But I think that Japan did not have consistent foreign policy towards the non-oil producing countries. Well, in fact, I'm not criticizing such policy. It seems to me that Japan's lack of consistent foreign policy to the non-oil producers, as well as conflict states in the Middle East, has brought security and political advantages to Japan in a sense. It has provided Japanese nationals working or studying in the region with safety and confidence, as Japan stands in a relatively politically neutral position. And also, Japan could hold unique diplomatic cause, maintaining cooperative ties with both US, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, or Palestine and Israel. This should be regarded as Japan's diplomatic advantage to contribute to international efforts for keeping the Middle East stability and security on its own way. But I think recently some analysts claimed that the current drastic changes in the international and the domestic environment have pushed Japan to change such an, let's say, ambiguous political stance. They say that the world will never be the same, and therefore it's time to move forward. Usually I could see 2 points or 2 reasons in such a view. The first is that Syria is in danger, and its collapse will lead to the collapse of the entire region. Especially the rise of the so-called Islamic State is becoming a significant security threat, not only to Syria and its neighbors, but also to Japan, Japan's homeland, or Japanese nationals working in the region. So it is time to take actions. This is an idea. And secondly, since security situation in East Asia is likely to be getting more and more concerned and complex, Japan needs to identify itself to accommodate more with the US up-to-date global strategy or foreign policy to secure the political stability in East Asia. Japan has actually started such a move already. We know the recent passage of historic legislation concerning the JSDF's overseas deployments in the framework of the right of collective self-defense. I think it's a double-edged sword that can cause security dilemma between Japan and the neighboring states in East Asia. So it's in the big argument. Yes, this view is maybe right. I agree. We cannot ignore the recent political developments in both the Middle East and East Asia. But even if so, it seems to me that such a view is not reasonable or rational enough to secure Japan's future energy supplies. I mean, making a drastic change in its foreign policy, maybe shifting from reactive, passive to proactive, will bring more disadvantages than advantages to Japan. I mean, I personally appreciate Japan's lack of consistent foreign policy towards the non-oil producing countries in conflict, which has actually won confidence and trust among the locals in the regions, as well as unique diplomatic course maintaining cooperative ties with most of the actors in the region. I think that Japan should take it in a positive way as let's say, strategic ambiguity, and just keep it so that Japan can exercise its unique soft power and diplomatic power to contribute to international efforts for keeping stability of the region in the Middle East its own way. Japanese government is repeatedly emphasizing that Japan is an integral part of the Western coalition to fight IS. But the reality is not that easy or simple or cool or beautiful. The reality is that Japan still has got tough domestic and international constraints to its overseas hard power projections in any interventionist approaches. So what Japan can and Japan should do is to continue to be a big financial donor to the social and human development in the Middle East with a relatively neutral political position. This is the reality of Japan. So if you cannot do it, you shouldn't say you can do it. So yeah, that's my view. I mean, Japan should accept this reality, and Japanese government can be more careful to address or express its political position, political stance regarding the Middle East conflicts. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Dr. Suechika, thank you. Thank you so much. We have approximately 15 or 20 minutes for questions. So if anybody, we've had 4 very rich presentations. If anybody would like to pose a question, we will have microphone floating around the room. Please state your name and state the question, and perhaps I can get things rolling. Ken, you mentioned that Japan is going to have an ongoing interest in observing political stability in the Middle East. As someone who's focused a lot on Japan's energy policies, on Japan's diplomacy in the region, are you satisfied, following on Dr. Suechika's presentation? Are you satisfied that the Japanese diplomatic profile with respect to the Middle East is about right, or are there adjustments that you can see?
Yes, I think that Japan's expected role in the region is really gradually changing, I think. Of course, that in terms of energy market or market outlet provider, Japan used to be and continue to be an important, element to be considered for the Middle East oil producers and gas producers. And Japan as an economic power, I think that it is expected to provide some potential to diversify the economy. And I think this traditional expectation continue to be there. But as my fellow panelists pointed out, the current Japanese government, led by Prime Minister Abe, I think that taking a kind of gradual step toward expanding or enhancing the role of Japan in the region. Of course, that there are lots of domestic political constraints, but I think that particularly that the current government has an idea that Japan need to be in the region, not only in the traditional way, but the new way. Yeah. But I'm not sure whether this is really appreciated by the region, because this is really a gradual and a step-by-step approach. But I hope. Yeah.
Fair enough. Sarah, you'll forgive me for taking advantage of your presence in this way, but as you process the various dynamics you so ably described during your talk, if the government of Japan were a client of yours, what would you be recommending in terms of a general approach, given the nature of the challenges that are being faced?
I would like to first start with what I observed talking to Japanese officials and the companies that we are working with. As in the previous meeting and today this meeting was mentioned in detail, that I think you mentioned perfectly that the economic relation between Iran and Japan was not determined because of the political relation between Iran and Japan, but U.S.-Japan relation. This is very important because U.S. is ally with Japan, and relation with U.S. is very important. And when it comes to having or increasing economic relation with Iran, Japan has always been looked into U.S. policies and always was very cautious into expanding that relation with Iran in a way that, as the ambassador was mentioned today, Japanese ambassador, the historical relation, the economic, the commercial part of it is on one side relation with Iran, but it doesn't jeopardize U.S.-Japan relation. And something that was interesting, I spoke with a few years ago with one of the Japanese embassy officials, and we were talking about, because Japan could not pay back to Iran for the oil that was importing. So it was kind of oil for goods relation between Iran and its customers. And one of the challenges that Japan had was to convince Japanese companies, let's say like automobile, to export Japanese cars to Iran in return for oil, which could be a profit that was not under sanction and could create a high profit for the country, economic profit for the companies and the country. The reason for that was, let's say, Japanese automobile companies they were not at all interested in creating any risk for the relation between U.S. companies and U.S. market that they had for having relation with Iran. And now going back to what is happening on the Iran side, of course, it had been mentioned that there has been high-level official meetings, commercial delegates went to Iran, but Japan was not so. Japan was not one of the frontline companies to show interest in investing in Iran's energy industry. They showed an interest in like metals, mining, other industry, but not in the energy sector. And the main reason for that is Japan, as mentioned today, has invested very seriously on importing U.S. resources, oil or gas, as diversification, as part of its energy security diversification plan. I hope you correct me, or a minister corrects me if I'm not mistaken. So it's very important when it comes to Japan-Iran's energy relation not to risk Japan-U.S. relation. Of course, investing in Iran has its own commercial benefits for Japan, and of course Japan will look into it with talk, but Japan is looking into Iran's energy industry cautiously. Now, what I would recommend as a non-biased scholar I think that Japan has a correct approach, because it's not only Japan-U.S. relation, but Japan-Saudi relation, and Japan can play a very wise game between Iran and Saudi to get the best incentives, the best prices, even Qatar on the gas and oil. So I think something was mentioned by Suchika-san that in the morning, that Japan doesn't have a neutral policy, but ambiguous policy. So this is very important. You know, you might think that Japan has a neutral policy, but I think what I observe is that Japan is playing very wisely. So keeping Iran and Saudi and US, it can always get leverages that on the economic side or political from one side, depending how they're balancing this relation with Iran, Saudi, or US vis-a-vis each other. So I think that they don't need the consulting. They're doing the best approach they're having. Also, in part of Iran, still there are lots of uncertainties with regard to who is the next US administration, what is the next US policy toward Iran. And also, there has been some changes in Iran. Of course, now we know who are sitting in the parliament of Iran. We know who is the president for the next few years. But Iran has always, the changes in Iran has been seasonal. So, okay, we had a great change. People vote, contributed, centrists are, but is this sustainable? Is there going to be another seasonal change that radicals are coming to power? So I think Japan will look cautiously the changes in Iran and will look into its investment in Iran more cautiously, perhaps starting from less sensitive industries, but of course with the approach of economic benefits and profits.
Terrific, terrific. Well, Matsunaga-san, I think it was you who mentioned that from a Japanese point of view, there will obviously be a key question answered when a new American administration comes in and basic decisions are made about the nature of the U.S. bilateral relationship with Iran, whether the nuclear deal is upheld or scrapped. Given that risk can never be eliminated entirely in any kind of commercial undertaking, what is your sense of how Japanese companies can best approach the issue of Iran right now, the possibility of opportunities, given this very, very fundamental question looming out there?
Just thank you for the question. I think we're trying to learn a lesson from our past dealings. Iranian officials have told us many times, 3 strikes out. We invested IJPC in the south area and the heavy industry before the revolution. And after the revolution, we tried to maintain, but the Iran-Iraq war started. So we withdrew the first strike out. Second one, in the early 90s, we gave Iran a loan for the Karen Dam power plant project. And then it was during the Clinton administration, and they pressured us to stop it. And we tried to, not listen to it, but then we eventually succumbed to this pressure, and we discontinued this loan. And the third one is after the election of President Khatami, in the year 2000, we signed a contract to develop the Azerbaijan oil field. And then also this, to make a long story short, we had to abandon it in the middle of the project. So Iranian officials are saying, okay, Japan comes, but then they go quickly, pack up and go. So Japanese, the corporates are do not want to do that. Do not want to repeat that, they start something and then just stop in the middle, not achieving anything. So that's why it's very important for the Japanese government to provide a scheme in which this investment can be continued. And then the deal that I mentioned, which was signed recently between the Japanese and the Iranian government, is a kind of new and creative one. By involving the Iranian government to pay for the loss, any loss. So it's of course, the political will has to be in our prime minister's office, but then at this time, I sense slightly different, more secure, more well thought out approach between the Japanese government and the Japanese private sector. So I'm hoping
on the order of $1 trillion price tag. Have you given this any thought in terms of a potential role Japan or Japanese companies might play?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely Japan have has the potential to take part in the reconstruction of post-war Syria. But anyway, the war is still going on, so it depends on when ceasefire comes into effect. Yeah, but now it's been 2 weeks. Yeah, ceasefire going on, but we don't know what will happen in the next couple of days. Yeah, I heard that ceasefire will be extended to I don't know, 1 month, 2 months. Yeah, but still, fighting is going on. So, yeah, at this stage, yeah, Japan has no choice to get engaged in. Yeah, so ceasefire comes first, then yeah, Japan can take part in.
Okay, given Japan's new status as a member of the International Syria Support Group,
Yeah.
Do you think that this is potentially a sector that Japan can focus on in terms of developing information that can be acted upon within that group?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions in the audience? Yes, sir.
I am Charlie Knocker, a master's student at Johns Hopkins SAIS. What are the prospects for Iran's LNG exports in the medium to long term, and to what extent should Japan be influencing on that subject? And related to that, how concerned is Japan about underinvestment in the LNG industry worldwide? With a low oil price environment right now, a lot of the big international oil companies are seeing credit downgrades, or a watch for ExxonMobil on their sterling AAA credit rating because of a lot of their expensive LNG projects. Going forward, when oil gets more expensive, and if there's not that LNG infrastructure, how will that affect Japan? And are they doing anything about that right now?
I think somewhere between Ken and Sarah, there's the perfect answer to this. Ken?
Firstly, that I'd like to explain from a Japanese perspective. Of course, that any project to contribute to diversification of supply is welcome. But I think that LNG is a little bit different from the commodity as a crude oil. Normally, that the LNG is a more long-term relationship. And given that the current extremely low LNG price, I think that it is very difficult for any country, including Iran, to really embark on make a final investment decision. So, and also Iran need natural gas, not only for LNG, they need natural gas for the oil field development, petrochemical, and provide natural gas export by pipeline by neighboring countries. Probably that the LNG is considered a kind of long-term option. And I think that if that proposed condition is very favorable, some company, Japanese company, may be interested in, but I think it's a kind of a long shot or long-term strategy. So in short, it is interesting, but I think it take probably years. And if Iran is very keen, I think that they should be very serious to give not only Japan, but many Asian buyers to a very favorable condition.
Sarah, anything to add to that?
Sure. On LNG, the part of the LNG technology, the compressors, the liquefaction compressors, is mostly American technology. So under sanctions, Iran put a lot of effort in obtaining that technology, couldn't, and I don't think even Iranian officials are expecting that they're going to gain that technology sometime soon. So LNG is something that is really not as an option for Iran. The other option is pipeline, but Iran learned, in the process of these long negotiations with India and Pakistan, that the pipeline is very political. for any country that is going to receive or send or transfer this gas, because if you're India or if you're any receiving country, you don't want your gas to pass from different countries, and this is just the security issues. And there's also other political issues, might be US introducing alternative routes to that natural gas, or like other countries be interested. So it's a very long process, political process. So I think especially since 2012 that Iran was under sanctions, Iranian approach toward their gas export, if, as Ken Koyamasan mentioned, one day they have an export capacity, is more using it inside and export the products of that outside. So Iran's gas production is expected to double. Iranian oil minister expected sometimes next year, but we think really by end of 2020. And even if their production capacity doubles, still they have a lot of plans, a lot of demand in different sites. Their general demand is growing, domestic demand. As you mentioned, there is a reinjection plans to maintain their oil project. They are introducing their petrochemical production is going to be triple in the next few years, so they need triple time. They're all natural gas-based natural gas for using that. And something that is very important is that Iran's leader, since 2012 sanctions, introduced a new concept of economy of resistance. So economy of resistance is focusing on creating a more value-added products in Iran to create jobs, diversify economy, but also create resistance against possible new sanctions. So Iran's gas export policy in the nature of natural gas converted into more of export of electricity. And Iran learned that if they convert the gas inside into electricity and export electricity to Turkey or to Iraq, it's much harder for US or any other country to put sanctions on electricity export of Iran, because then the Turkish government, the Iraqi government has to deal with every household that are receiving electricity. So they introduced new routes. They're exporting gas to Iraq. They already built most of the routes. It's going to be two of Iraqi power generations, and they are introducing other plans to export electricity. But when it comes to Japan, I kind of observe that Japan is bored with Iran's energy story. Because not only because of the historical relation with Iran, but also Iran is offering the same type of crude oil that Saudi other GCC people are offering. Iran's natural gas is not going to be Qatari natural gas because of the export problem. So Iran cannot export LNG. They can export FLNG using floating storage, floating LNG capacity, but that's very limited capacity. Is not going to substitute Qatari LNG to Iran. So the type of crude oil and natural and the export options, type of crude oil is very close to what Japan already is receiving from other GCC members. The type of incentives that Iran is trying to offer, don't forget that Iran has already a lot of money in Japanese bank for the past few years that sold oil to Japan, and also selling more oil as a limited or minimum amount that Japan wants to still maintain from Iran. Those revenue would come back to Iran as sort of investment, and that would help. That would be a good option for Japan to repay Iran's oil in kind of an investment. It's kind of a guaranteed investment because you're receiving oil and you might not lose your investment down the line. But more than that, I think Japan is more excited about other sources. For instance, as mentioned and other colleagues alluded to that, US energy resources has offered different type of crude oil, natural gas, different natural gas options, different prices. So it's, I think today's reality of the market creates more excitement in different markets for Japan. But of course, still there are minimum relation that could increase a bit between Iran and Japan on this bilateral energy relations.
Terrific. Thank you, Sarah. Anybody else? One more. Yes.
Hi, I'm Emily Packer, Department of State. And my question is about refugee funding efforts, especially in host communities. Since Japan was a major donor at the recent conference on Syria, which had as its results a sort of hodgepodge of long-term development measures and emergency aid measures to surrounding countries, what is the view on are those sort of programs or those sort of results workable from the Japanese point of view in containing the refugee issue?
Okay. Either of you gentlemen toward the end?
I don't have any strong opinion on that.
Well, I'm not the right person to answer the question, but my guess is that, or maybe Minister wants to answer that. But I'm asking to follow up, but my guess is that it's complicated, very complicated. For example, I teach a university called Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, and we have many international students. And recently, there's a big upsurge of Syrian students. And then they come and they don't want to go back, and so they are like refugees. But then that's the best we could do. You know, I'm not a government official, but the Japanese government has a completely strict, very different kind of thinking about refugees, and then how the Japanese refugee policy and the system are supposed to work. And then, so in the short term, it's very difficult for the Japanese government to change its policy. That's my personal guess, and I'm not responsible for the policy. But
thank you, Matsunaga-san. Ladies and gentlemen, we are over time. I really do appreciate your taking the time this morning to join us. And please join me in thanking our superb panel of experts.